Now, I'll be the first to admit that it was nice to see the return of Temuera Morrison back on our screens after almost 18 years without him fitting into the role of any clone troopers or even Boba. He certainly spared no expense when it came to committing himself to the role of Boba Fett, and his abilities as an actor admittedly weren't exemplified during the 20 minutes of screen time in the prequels, but he was certainly the actor that brought a necessary amount of weight to the characters like Jango, Cody, and now Boba. Not that kind of weight though. That said though, it needs to be acknowledged that the way in which he returned and how he was handled thereafter certainly worked about as well as smashing two potatoes together and expecting the same result as gently blending them. I mean, admittedly, yeah, you'd get the same result, just not the nice, refined, smooth, digestible clouds that you'd normally receive. His return and his series are completely opposing forces and work about as connectively as two magnets trying to be fudged together. If I was forced to sit down and watch one for the rest of my life, there's no question which one I'd choose. This is more for my own interests in this video and to air my grievances regarding the series of the Book of Boba Fett, so settle in if you're interested and let us know what you think by the end. Now, Boba Fett was never someone I was besotted with, as I grew up with these badasses. But visually he was striking, if not a little clunky with the cargo trousers and a finer collection of braids than Jack Sparrow, but the intrigue to his character, the history that laid within him, and the silent persona that made for such a compelling character drove fans nuts for years to understand more of him. But I doubt many thought it would go down from this, to this, and to this.
Like a panther.
The man was a myth for years, first being introduced in the Star Wars Holiday Special, if anybody remembers that mess.
Whip, stir, whip, stir, wah! Having fun, alright? Coming along nicely now. Step 3.
And then later moving into live action with The Empire Strikes Back, and then meeting his eventual demise in Return of the Jedi, that was done in a way that pissed fans off so badly the only way they could salvage it was by giving us a generation of memes thanks to these guys.
I don't like sand. Hello there.
How rude. Tuck him away.
I have the high ground! Good job.
Do it.
From that demise though came a question. A question that at this point would have been passed down by 3 generations in your average household, and that question was, do you think Boba survived? It was a question that drove fans towards their computers and pads to try and write out new versions of fanfics and theories that would ultimately give their hands a better use, if you catch my drift, and a question that we waited almost 40 years for an answer to, and what we got initially was better, until it wasn't. In 2018, following a disastrous attempt to spark a new generation of Star Wars fans with Mary Sue, Rey, Disney were desperate for something to bring back those lapsed fans who said, screw you, we're out. The ladies and gents that saw fit to spend their time indulging themselves in something better, like Bleach. So what was their desperate attempt? Well, if you cast your mind back to 2018, it was announced that the Clone Wars would be returning for one last season, in 2020 when Disney had not long debuted their very own streaming service. But what was going to headline that streaming service? It was of course the Jon Favreau-led creation that was The Mandalorian. An idea that he pretty much pioneered given his role as Pre-Vizsla in the Clone Wars, and introducing a more coherent understanding of the Mandalorian creed and cultures for modern audiences. Not to mention this was something that he was desperate to do and felt the fans needed. To no one's surprise, because it wasn't caught up in the Skywalker saga or Rey, it was a rousing success for the debut of Disney's very own streaming platform that pushed subscriptions with the inclusion of the Clone Wars and the promise of more adventures with the Mandalorian. But it did leave many wondering what or who would be next. Fans speculated about who could be brought back due to where the Mandalorian sits in the timeline, and the question arose of whether it could be familiar faces or introduce ones we were yet to see. The heavy emphasis coming out the back of the Mandalorian's first season within its 5th episode after Fennec was killed was this nice little sound of spurs that has become an iconic sound associated with Boba Fett, which drove many fans insane for almost another year after, speculating whether or not it was actually Boba, and if he was truly the one that found Fennec, who would he be now? Well, along came Season 2 of The Mandalorian to grace us after a disastrous year that was 2020. A year that had proven to become the descent of man and drove many to scroll through senselessly looking at shit like this. We had our saving grace, and it was the return of The Mandalorian to our screens, and it did the unthinkable. It gave us a thrill for the first episode back, battling dragons, bringing in new faces, and returning us to old ones. It added more lore to a planet practically about to burst with the amount of history involved with it, and it brought back the man of the hour himself. This admittedly led to many speculating for weeks after of why Temuera Morrison was back, through fears that their anticipated hopes would be dashed with it actually being Boba Fett. But given the armour was on Cobb Vanth, it was the likeliest conclusion of his survival. Then, 2 cameos later, we were graced with what is to this day my absolute favourite episode of The Mandalorian, titled The Tragedy. There was, however, nothing tragic about this one. This was the full-bodied return of Boba Fett that left the answer of his survival a mystery and gave us a grizzled but humbled hunter that simply wanted his legacy back and to start anew. He was presented with facial scarring as a nice visual distinction to Django and Cody. The gravelly tone in his voice hit you with weight, as did his actions, as it gave you more insight into the abilities he possessed that we just never got to witness due to the reliance on technology. But all of that was stripped away, and the man kicked ass with nothing but an oversized toothbrush. Temuera Morrison brought it with his expressions and demonstrated techniques that felt refreshing to witness in Star Wars. You felt the wisdom and the power in his movements, and you knew that Boba had been through the mill. Enough to know at least that you cannot trust the Empire, and he left nothing to chance and kicked the ever-loving shit out of them. Boba was back, and better than ever. The powers that be involved with Star Wars actually made a welcome decision for once by bringing back a legacy character and bringing in a director such as Robert Rodriguez to hold up the episode itself that felt like a comfortable fit given his resume. Fans were happy, Disney was happy, the writers were happy, and the directors too. A series that was made up pretty much from legacy characters, with the live-action debuts of Bo-Katan and Ahsoka Tano, had pretty much proved to become a winning formula for the season. Little did we know that in a little over a year, it was all about to be undone. So with such an impressive return and a degree of interest brought back into the franchise, how were Disney going to follow it up? Well, looking at the stinger from the closing moments of The Mandalorian, it clearly positioned Boba as the new crime boss, as he killed Bib Fortuna and sat on the throne of Jabba, and presented a new ruthless aggression that was needed in Star Wars at this point, but again was amenable enough to at least let you speak before deciding to kill you. It was announced that we would be receiving the Book of Boba Fett series, and people immediately got excited, because Boba had a new paint job. He had a badass in Fennec at his side. He had connections to a group of Mandalorians, and he'd just taken the palace that sealed his fate originally. He'd come full circle with what ended him, and it was about to become the grounds for his rebirth. Was he going to become a target of a war incited by his insurrection? Was he coming after all those that had wronged him? Or was he going to be in the line of defense for those that needed it by using his newfound privileges and connections to take down some of the larger syndicates and restrict movements from the evildoers? The answer is none of the above. He instead wants to make friends and ask people politely if they'll bend a knee or stay out of his way, with false promises of demise unless you're a background extra. This new version of Boba Fett proved to be a shell of the man we were introduced to just a year prior. He suddenly went from being a force of nature to a small breeze that couldn't even push over a fucking plastic cup. Concerned more for the safety of a species that would sooner kill someone like him than waste their time leaving him to shrivel up under 2 suns, bring in the most comical looking bunch of sidekicks that make the Power Rangers look like genuine threats, and the idea of which I hope never sees the light of day again, taking on old foes that have seemingly been forgotten by how hollow their interactions were, and we saw him take a lot of baths. Thrilling stuff indeed. I went into the Book of Boba Fett expecting the same silent enforcer transitioning into a leader, to be a kicking ass, taking names type of dude, but somehow Fennec proved to be twice the man that he was. The anticipation was immense for this one, with the hopes it would be tonally similar to Andor, but with more action set pieces, and would have established Boba as a force to be reckoned with, and really cement his understanding of who could be an asset, and who could be removed without disrupting the balance in place. This show should have dealt him the respect by just giving the fear into hearts with the mention of his name. Boba's name was mentioned at various points though, and it was met with about as much intimidation as this fucker.
In the mirror and in all seriousness saying to yourself, you know what would be a really kick-ass name? Taserface! That's how I hear you in my head!
The Book of Boba Fett was a masterclass in how not to develop your characters, and sadly succumbed to the copy and paste formula of Disney, in that it brings in a named character to the headline of a show or movie, but doesn't bring anyone in who respects the lore or understands how to write them competently enough. As I said in the beginning, I didn't grow up necessarily smitten with Boba, but he was always a compelling concept that I liked the look of aesthetically, and thanks to his reintroduction in The Mandalorian cemented my beliefs in the character, that he was truly a freak of nature at one point, but he was limited only by his own hubris, brought on by his over-reliance on technology, that ultimately made him complacent. It brought him back as a belligerent badass that no longer had fucks to give as he faced death and told it to go fuck itself. And they decided to give us these nuggets of shit that is far removed from what audiences hoped for and what the character truly deserved. Instead, we came out of the show talking about the moments that didn't concern nor involve him. The show was just a placeholder because Pedro Pascal was too busy to commit to a full production at the time, and it shows. If there was a level of sincerity creating the Book of Boba Fett, it was missed. This should have been a gritty, brooding, mature crime drama that firmly established Boba as the future of the underworld, but instead became a drive-by adventure for the Mandalorian and Grogu. Now, while I don't have an issue with Mando's inclusion, it would have been preferable to have kept that side of things out until Season 3. It completely undercut Boba, and whilst there wasn't much to admittedly undercut, if this was a far more competently written series, it would have been an unnecessary distraction. But instead is hailed as a saviour for what became a dwindling series and lost much of its audience by episode 3. The writing was extremely damaging to the reputation of Boba and removed any believability going forward that he is a competent, intelligent and calculating badass that could level a man in 2 moves or less. When all is said and done though, I'm glad we've got Tem back, and his relationship with Ming-Na makes for certainly a dynamic duo in Fennec and Boba. But sadly, rather than jogging at a gentle pace that would have allowed for a constructed and thoughtful entry in the Star Wars franchise, we were graced with a show that dragged itself across a bed of glass just to reach a point where The Mandalorian took over, only to fumble in the final steps as we closed out. I can only hope that if Boba is included in the franchise in the near future, that he's handed off to someone who understands him, and could possibly save some of his integrity. I grew to love this side of Boba Fett and the man who led with the beliefs that death would have to fucking earn him at this point. I personally would have preferred to never have known or see how they actually dealt with his death, as the mysticism around him is what made him such a compelling and engaging character. He was a silent taskmaster that under the helmet marked you with a stare. I think if you take the tone of Andor, the actions of The Mandalorian, and put Boba Fett in its place, you could have had a winning series on your hands, and allow him to unleash that side of him again that truly invigorated fans once more. Anyway, that's going to do it for now. Thanks for watching. Subscribe to the channel on your way out, leave a like, don't forget to drop a comment down below and let me know what you thought of the Book of Boba Fett, and make sure to have a look at some of my previous content. And until next time, take care, and may the Force be with you.